I'm Emma and I am from Trinity Community Arts. We run the Trinity Centre in Lawrence Hill. Oh, next slide, please. For people who don't know the building, we are a community arts centre with citizen-led decision-making at our heart. We're a membership organisation, and we're here providing access to arts and culture for about 70,000 people a year. We believe in the creative and transformative power of the arts to change communities, both on a personal level and also on a kind of social level, to help communities connect and take action about the things that matter to them, as well as stimulating local economy and driving jobs and growth and investment within areas. We've got a really diverse programme. You can check our website out, so I won't go too much into that now. But as you can see, also it's a big old grade 2 star listed converted former church, so and it's a Bristol City Council owned asset, so we run it on a community asset transfer, and we have invested about £3 million in its repair over the last sort of decade or so. And so I'm just here to talk about, I guess, civic voice and action within our work, and just give a couple of examples about some of the areas where we are working at the moment to try and drive change around community-led decision-making. So we're working in partnership at the moment with St Paul's Carnival and Citizens in Power, which is a national organisation looking at citizen-led decision-making. And we are developing and getting ready to deliver a Citizens for Culture Assembly for the South West region, so for the West of England Combined Authority area, so Bristol, Bath, North East Somerset and South Gloucestershire. So we've been working with the West of England Combined Authority. We have some funding secured to deliver that assembly, which we're going to be setting up and running at the start of 2025, so after the general election. And hopefully that assembly will lead to a citizen-led cultural plan that the West of England will then adopt and deliver, and that will shape any devolved investment decisions that will be led by the communities who have helped inform that strategy. As well as running the Trinity Centre, which is a grade 2 star listed publicly owned civic asset. We have just embarked on a mission to save Jacob's Wells. It's a former Victorian bathhouse, and it was a dance centre in Hot Wells for over 30 years before it closed due to sort of disrepair. We've been working with a community association based in the locality and a number of other stakeholder groups, both kind of youth service providers, arts organisations and kind of heritage and conservation experts, to develop a plan to bring the building back into use as a multi-use community hub. We've raised a bunch of cash. We're still fundraising, so check out our fund surfer if you want to chuck a fiver in. That would be brilliant. And the last thing is we are working with a bunch of other community buildings who are part of Bristol City Council's community asset transfer portfolio to develop a community manifesto, which we're hoping the city will take on board, that is looking to drive a bit of change around the decisions that Bristol make about the buildings that we own. So at the moment there is a community asset transfer policy. It's quite old. It's great that the city has one, but it's maybe not fit for purpose now in the sort of times that we live in. There's obviously the context of a lot of local authority budget shortfalls, threats to community spaces of kind of asset disposal, as we've seen with Jacob's Wells. And so we're looking at how we can place more emphasis on community decision making in order to protect the spaces that we know and love and that kind of underpin our social and civic kind of ecology. And that's most of the stuff that we're doing at the moment, apart from running Trinity. I just stuck a few kind of do's and don'ts on, because I just think sometimes that's the most interesting thing. It's like, what do you know? What do you learn? One of the do's is like you've got to make a lot of time for this work. It's like really time and resource intensive in terms of your own capacity to make sure you're having the conversations with like your key stakeholders. So from like the your key decision makers, but also the people that are within your spaces and your localities, so that you can really get to grips with what's needed. Getting out and going places and making use of any sort of pro bono advice that you can get your hands on to do anything that you can't. And I think where Bristol's at, it's part of a wider national context. So just making sure that the story about whatever you're doing connects to the wider narrative around, how we as a group of citizens within a country protect the things that give our spaces value. Don't pay for what you can do yourself. Try not to accept no from anyone who can't have the power to say yes. I think that's a really important thing. Like a lot of this is about kicking at lots of closed doors and being really persistent. But also don't fixate on you being unique or you being the first person to do something. I think we're part of like a kind of local and national movement, and that's like a really good thing. So it's, like I said, about joining up those narratives and not being so worried that you're like the only one doing this thing. Projects aren't linear, so just go with the flow, and just accept that you'll probably never be finished, so embrace imperfection. And that's all I want to say.
Hello. I hope you'll bear with me. I don't have a PowerPoint. What I do have is an incredibly beautiful newspaper. Hopefully quite a few of you have grabbed a paper already. My very charming colleagues over there have got a massive stack of papers, so if you want to grab a paper, it is free, or I should say it is made free by members. That's very important to know, and I will talk about that a little bit more in a minute. I am the strategy lead at the Bristol Cable. I actually have been a member since it began. It's about 10 years old now. We've got our 10th birthday coming up this year. And we are a co-op. You may have heard of us. Hopefully some of the people in the room are members already. The paper is owned by just over 2,500 people across the city. And we do mostly investigative journalism, solutions journalism, and community journalism. I was really interested to hear everything that Emma said, because so much of it really resonated with me about, the way that you build projects, the way that you kind of try and protect projects, the way that projects are not linear, and certainly the Cable has had that similar experience. We have done a lot of different things. We've sort of started from just a few people doing journalism in a free office space back in 2014 to a newspaper that comes out quarterly, a website where we're publishing things all the time, and obviously social media. We have just launched regular weekly podcasts. We do events. And so there is just a huge amount of work that we've been able to sort of grow over the last 10 years through being a membership organisation and having the support of people around the city. We also raise money from individual donations, grants from grant makers. That can be journalism funder organisations from Europe, family philanthropic organisations from America, government grants and things like that, although there are very, very few of those. And I'm sure that everybody here has heard that local journalism is in crisis. But I would forgive you guys for not knowing that, because Bristol actually has a really amazing media ecosystem. We've actually got quite a few newspapers and magazines in Bristol of loads of different types. Some of them are free, some of them are paid for. But I would encourage you, and we're talking obviously today about mutual support and the future, I would really encourage you to become a member of the Cable. Obviously, I'm going to say that. But I would really encourage you to have a look at what we do and become a member. I would also encourage you, if you read other news, to give a little bit of money to them every month, whether that's a local paper or a national paper, but particularly your local papers. The narrative at the moment is local news is in crisis. It's facing an extinction event, and that is something that we're trying to reverse. So not only are we working in Bristol, but we also work around the country, and actually with some international organisations as well, local newspapers and local media companies that are trying to basically reverse those fortunes and do new things, find new revenue streams, and kind of sharing learning, and essentially trying to make sure that local journalism remains in existence and thrives and does what it used to do, which is basically preserve local democracy. That's where it all starts. We have a quarterly newspaper, a weekly newsletter, And we post online pretty much every day. As I said, we've just launched weekly podcasts, which obviously makes our journalism a lot more accessible. You know, if people are like in the car, you can't sit there and read a newspaper, at least I hope you don't. You can listen to the podcast though, and so that makes it a lot more accessible for a lot more people to engage with our journalism. We are doing lots of big projects coming up this year. For example, you may have seen that the media organisations across Bristol have joined together to basically start a task force to try and better understand knife crime in the city, and work with people in positions of power, families that have been affected and families that might be affected, to basically try and reduce the number of knife crime incidents in the city. And rather than saying, you know, we're people that work at newspapers, we know what you should do, we're going to go through a whole listening process. We've written out a kind of 10-point plan. Actually, I think there were 6 points, but there is a point plan for us to start to understand this better and address it and ensure, for example, that our reporting doesn't contribute to those divisions and doesn't contribute to harming families, for example, who have already been having, you know, the worst time of their lives. That kind of ethical journalism and doing journalism in a different way is something that is incredibly important to us. We recognise the responsibility that newspapers and journalists have of not making an already horrendous situation worse. I think the latest stat that I saw was that only 13% of people in the UK trust the press. And if I'm honest, I'm not hugely surprised based on the way that our press has often behaved in the past. So that is something that we're really aware of, and we are working, as I said, with lots of national, international organisations to try and work out how we have a more ethical and sustainable industry. We also are working on environmental just transition. Obviously, the local government in Bristol is changing quite drastically this year. And one of the things that we want to work on is making sure that we hold the new council, the committee system, to account for the pledges that they have made, particularly with regards to climate. And we also are doing a lot more, as I said, podcasts, and we're trialling something called the Debrief, which is a conversational and accessible podcast that we're going to do every week, which basically is our reporters talking to each other about how they do our journalism. What did they choose to do? What's the story? How did they go about getting that story? So we've got some really exciting stuff coming up this year. But what we are doing at the moment, as I said, is engaging in a pretty big fundraising campaign. There are some scenarios, when we talk about local journalism and how it's funded and the kind of situation that it's in right now, there is a scenario in the future where local journalism just doesn't exist anymore and people rely on Facebook groups in order to get their information. We're seeing this around the country already. In places called, you might have heard the phrase, news deserts. I'm a member of the Charitable Journalism Project, and we did some research a couple of years ago that showed that there's now 4 million people in the country that don't have a local newspaper. They live in a news desert, and those people, our research showed, basically get their news from a bunch of poorly moderated Facebook groups, which, as I'm sure you can understand, does not lend itself to social cohesion and community well-being. So there is a scenario in which that gets worse, but we really want to be a part of building a scenario in which that gets better, and that we have lots of different local newspapers, local magazines in every city, not just in Bristol. We're working on how to make that work. So I'm really interested to know what your questions are for me. I'm really interested to hear about the other speakers as well, the other organisations in the city that are doing this kind of work but in their industries. And I do genuinely think that the future is essentially moving away from corporates and conglomerates and into local, not necessarily co-ops, although we are a co-op, but those sorts of social enterprises and co-op organisations that are based on the people like you in this room being a part of those organisations and leading those organisations, whether that's actually being on staff or whether that's just being asked what it is that you want to see from that organisation, what your priorities are, being an engaged member of that organisation. So hopefully we're doing that work in news, and these guys are doing that work in other industries. So yeah, that's what I think the future of Bristol is. I think it's places like Sparks, I think it's papers like The Cable, and I think that it's organisations like the ones that you're going to hear from today. So thank you very much for having me, and I'm really interested in hearing your questions for me later on. Cheers.
So my name's Danny Balla. I'm the project lead for the Bristol Commons at Coexist. It's kind of difficult to explain what the Bristol Commons is without giving it some context and its origin. So I'm just going to very briefly go and explain where it came from. So we used to run Hamilton House. We set it up in 2008 and ran it for 10 years. And this was our big project, basically, a big community hub. And we were there in one location for 10 years. We had over 500 artists, social enterprises and charities based in the building. At its peak, it had 20,000 visitors per month, and it contributed over £21 million into the local economy each year. And it networked with thousands of groups, organisations and movements locally, nationally and internationally. But it is a co-opted space. And what that means is we were evicted in 2018, and the building owners passed on the contract of running that building to a private organisation that took on a lot of the ideas and a lot of the volunteer hours that went into creating that building. And so we were a little bit kind of lost and forlorn and licking our wounds, as you can imagine. And we had to help distribute the community to various locations around the city. And we were asking, well, what now? What do we do? What's our purpose? And how can we make sure that this doesn't happen again? So rooted in relentless optimism, which is one of the slogans from the People's Republic of Stokescroft, and Hamilton House wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for the work that they did there, we decided that we were going to push on. And we saw ourselves as rooted in networks. So if you imagine all the little dots and nodes, there are all these different projects all around the city, or maybe kind of like community workers or changemakers, and we're all kind of like linked together through various different things, but we need a way of working together better. If that was a brain, can you just go back 1 second, that's right. If that was a brain, then we need to fight to kind of charge all those synapses up at once to really kind of like exert ourselves. And so we took inspiration from a few events. We were at Futur Ville, which was obviously kind of hosted by Art Space Life Space, and was an incredible event, very inspiring. And What is Land Justice Conference, which was held at Trinity Centre. And these really informed our thinking. And one of the people I see on the next slide, this wasn't meant to be in there, was Dr. Martin Schwegmann, who is in Berlin and is responsible for the municipality delivering thousands of art spaces to artists all around the city at low cost. And we went to meet him and various projects all over Europe to see, well, how do these community spaces stay and thrive? How do they actually manage to retain that community wealth and not get it lost and sucked up and co-opted by capitalism? So we started to put all those things together, and then eventually we came to this idea of the commons. If we look at things through the commons lens, well, let's just define what the commons is to begin with, because we needed to kind of find some sort of common ground here. The commons is the cultural and natural resources accessible to all members of a society, including natural materials such as air, water, and a habitable earth. And these resources are held in common even when owned privately or publicly. Traditional examples of commons include forests, fisheries, or groundwater resources, but increasingly the term commons is used for a broader set of domains. For example, a knowledge commons, digital commons, urban commons, health commons, cultural commons, etc. And that's what we saw our community hubs, our parks, our leisure centres, all of these places as commons. But they weren't being managed that way. They're being managed within this capitalist system and framework. So we turned to some advice. David Boileau is a key kind of thinker and writer on the commons, and co-wrote the book Free, Fair and Alive. And in that book they say that commons are pervasive, generative and a neglected social life form. So it's like it has this kind of intelligence to it. They're complex, adaptive, living processes that generate wealth, both tangible and intangible, through which people address their shared needs with minimal or no reliance on markets or states. Quite often commons is associated with a tragedy of the commons, but this is a bit of a myth, because what we've found through time is actually when you privatise property, that's when it gets exploited, not lots of people exploiting something that they share governance of. And when we think about the commons in Bristol, we identify lots of different types of community resource. So My Vart Studios is an example of one which is privately owned, privately run. This one. St Anne's House, which we moved to begin with after Hamilton House, is council owned but independently run. Hall is a lost space, very recently lost and sold. Sparks, a meanwhile space, which has a kind of a unique place in this kind of ecosystem. And at risk currently, Bridge Farm. So all these different types of spaces and potential spaces that are there and empty and waiting for something to happen. So we set up the Bristol Commons by inviting people coming together. So it was individuals, groups, organisations to build community power, land justice, and create systemic change. How do we shift things? How do we make sure that this doesn't keep on happening? And it had these initial objectives, which currently are being reviewed by one of the working groups to see whether or not this is what we want to move forward with. So they are kind of creating systemic change, bringing vital infrastructure into community ownership, generating a surplus so that we can actually reinvest that back into marginalised groups and radical projects rather than it being sucked up by private entities, sharing resources, so creating that culture of collaboration and reciprocity, and also collectively persuading and steering council and the government towards creating policies which actually support commons and common knowledge and common wealth. So we started to hold these events, and all were welcome. We're just going to run this as a little bit of a slideshow. This is our first one at the Trinity Centre. And we had all sorts of different discussions and working groups and more conversations and panellists, some of whom are here today. And we started to do through different workshops, prioritising play and arts practice as part of it, and asking what if? What if we did things differently? What if we worked together more coherently, more strategically, and more efficiently? There's always time out centred for sacredness and for taking a breath and connection. It's really important that we build this movement on real relationships that we nurture. So we always kind of take time out together to eat, to share food, and also to contribute our own ideas. So we always hold open spaces where people can put forward their questions, their ideas, their problems, and strategize together, because this is something that we don't have capacity for in our current climate. We never have the spaces to actually think big, think long term, get together and cross-pollinate between different projects. So that's what we started to do, and we thought, well, let's build this movement, not just on our own, because it's never going to work if it's just us kind of flying a flag. Let's do this collectively through commoning, and that's the principle of the movement. And it's been going well, and at the moment what we're doing is we're finalising our manifesto. So this is a slide of manifesto making, where people have been offering contributions to what they want to see this commons movement take on and really champion and prioritise, and how it wants to be rooted. And this festo currently is called Rebuild the Commons, a manifesto for recommoning community power, land justice and systemic change. It's 18 months worth of conversations and workshops. Over 70 organisations have been involved over the course of the project. Over 550 participants at different events, actually that's more now, and 216 contributors to the manifesto from all over Bristol. So that's what we're putting together, and we see this as something which is a circle. We're all in it, and if one of the chain comes away, then it's all going to fall down. So we need to look after every single person, every single organisation and group, and prioritising our attention to those that need it most, always making sure that the movement is accessible, that it's inclusive, and that those that have been marginalised by our society are given a space to have their voice heard and contribute in a way that is meaningful to them. So that's our movement. Our next event is at St Anne's House on the 27th of April. We move around. We had one here in February. We've been at Trinity Centre, and we've also been at Circa Media. And the idea is that we're animating and activating different areas of the city, bringing in new people each time. And it's working really well. We've got working groups that are now kind of taking the majority of the organising. So Coexist is ceding its responsibility, ceding its power, and ceding that kind of that role of kind of really leading the project and empowering others to kind of take it on, so that it's not just kind of led by one entity. It's never going to work in that way. We need it to be devolved, we need it to be inclusive, and we need it also to really be an act of commoning in and of itself. So that's how we see the change happening, and we invite everybody in Bristol, all the organisations that are kind of rooted in these values, to kind of participate. I think I'll leave it there.
My name is Tara. I'm from Kurdistan. I was born in Kurdistan. I'm here today as an independent person, just as me talking, because I thought I stand for people, I stand for other individuals as well who see themselves as activists, and I can see so many of us here who are activists. So yeah, I wanted to talk about disruption that leads us to take actions and to change and to challenge the status quo. And I am kind of known for doing that a lot everywhere I go. And some people don't like it, and some people do. And the ones that don't like it, I don't care. I don't care because you know, it says so much about who they are and how they think. And I only disrupt systems to make them more just. So if your system is unjust, then that's your fault. I'm going to disrupt it. So yeah, I wanted to talk a bit about that and how sometimes if you see me on social media, you'll see all the successes. Sometimes you don't share how hard it really is. So today I wanted to share the other side of it a little bit. So yeah, you might also recognize me from the recently successful Save St. Paul's Dentist campaign. I have to say, big up to the cable. Thank you, Danny. You gave us your speaker system for that fun day we had. And I'm just bringing it back to what you guys were saying. We can't do it without each other. We couldn't do it without your speaker system because we didn't have the funds. We couldn't do it without you guys, the cable, because you're the only journalists who followed our journey from the beginning when others at the start said, we don't want to follow you, there's no cause here, you're never going to win the campaign. But you guys did, and we have a podcast coming out with Alex from the cable soon, so yeah, watch out for that. So yeah, thank you very much. Thank you for being real, and thank you for being ethical, and I'm on the receiving end of everything you were saying earlier today about being ethical and really standing for community. You amplify our voices and our missions, so thank you. Thank you. And you physically did with the actual speaker. Thank you. So I'd like to go to the next slide, please. So I just wanted to everyone have a think about, when you hear the word disruption, what do you think? And I think generally humans associate that with in a negative way, that it's a negative thing. We're here to disrupt. Oh, she's a troublemaker, or he or they are troublemakers. And I wanted to look at it from the other side and say, actually, sometimes disrupting a system is very honorable for a lot of people like me. I come from Kurdistan. This is the Kurdistan in my mind, but if you look through it on the globe, it doesn't exist because it's been colonized. So there are 4 parts of Kurdistan. I never say I'm from Iraq in Kurdistan. I say I'm from southern Kurdistan because that is what it originally was before it got divided, conquered, you know. And so yeah, for people like me who are oppressed, who can't speak for themselves because they're in occupied land, and we know there are other, like the Palestinians right now, for them, they want to disrupt the system, they want to speak up for themselves because their system is oppressive. In their own land it's oppressive. So yeah, I just wanted to say, you know, disruption is an honor. I will do it all my life. So yeah, join me on the journey, guys. It's fun. So yeah, just wanted to put some questions out today about is disruptive activism the future? I think it is, because I don't think authorities are doing it for us right now. None of the systems are working. We're paying for systems that don't exist. Like, I'm paying loads of tax, guys, and the systems that are meant to be there do not exist. Dentistry, NHS, education is failing around us, and we deserve better. We're hardworking people, we're great communities, great groups, and why don't we get what we work hard for and what we contribute to? So I think we have to keep on disrupting if we want to get the change that we need from those in power. So there's something there about people power and the fact that we need to keep on disrupting. And this was my very proud moment of disruption years ago for demonstration for Rojava, which is a part of Kurdistan that's still under occupation by forces in the area. If you want to know more, please Google, but find your right sources. So yeah, that day I remember there was a lot of articles about us, about how we stopped the traffic, how we were we were slowing down traffic. and disrupting the bus service. But it just went right over me because we were doing it for the bigger cause, and whether it's a small cause or a big cause, just do it because it's worth it. Because if we don't do it while it's small, it will get bigger and worse. So we can see that with the Palestinian story, the Palestinians right now. So I'll keep referring to it because it needs to be referred to. So yeah, I think we should begin by challenging ourselves and how we see ourselves and our lens when we think about disruption and activism. And how do you see yourself? If you see me as an activist, does that mean you don't see yourself as an activist? And I don't really like that. I think we should all be activists. I don't think anyone should be called an activist really. But yeah, join the other side if you're not there, guys. It's fun when you win. And actually, there's a lot of power in not winning. There's a lot of learning, and there's a lot of mobilizing and meeting. Out of 1,000 people, you meet 10 great people, and they're the ones that really matter. So yeah, keep on doing it, guys. We'll go to the next one, please. So yeah, there is that period of like the deafening silence. And I wanted to share that in relation to the recent St. Paul's campaign, because I haven't shared this. This is the first time I'm going to share this, actually, which is for 11 months, I took on the mission to go and contact a lot of authorities, public bodies, and I used to work in community engagement, public health, and race equalities, right? So I had a lot of networks, and I thought, right, I've done a lot of work around the vaccines, around so much. I've built all these networks. I went through my big spreadsheet, and I contacted everyone as part of like the person who spearheaded the campaign. Nobody got back to us. Nobody got back to us. No newspapers, no journalists, nobody, apart from the cable, nobody. All the other, even local journalists were saying, actually, this is national crisis. You're not going to win. Why? And it was very hard. And at one point, there was like just me, my kids, and 2 more people protesting outside the dentist every Thursday after work. And it was really sad. It was actually a sad picture. And at one point, I was looking at my kids, my 3 small kids, and thinking, like, how is this going to go? I really want it to go well, so you could learn that you can be a part of change. And if it doesn't go well, how am I going to explain to you? But yeah, it worked out, and we persisted. And I think there's something there about all of us when we see, I'm sure some of you guys may have seen the campaign online, and you may have thought, even my own friends told me now, we never thought you'd win. We never thought it would be a victory. And sometimes you don't believe in it, but sometimes just believe in it, and you never know, it might make a big difference. When we met you, Danny, we were struggling about a speaker, and you just said, we've got one, and you don't have to pay us for it. You just said, I'll bring it to you as well, and I'll take it back. So it's things like that. You believed in us. You didn't know how that was going to go. You just said, okay, I'll share my resources with you guys. And maybe until this day, you didn't know how much it meant to you, but I'm going to say it. Thank you very much. So yeah, where are the allies? Who are the ones that really care about equity? Because the processes are broken. You pull apart any policy, it's out of date. It just about ticks all their boxes, but it doesn't tick our boxes. So yeah, I think enough is enough. Interrogate and tear it up, guys, because what else next? Housing is not working. The NHS is not working. Education's falling apart. Our teachers are not even qualified in the things they're teaching. So tear it up, guys. Disruption and collaboration. So the answer after that deafening silence is collaborating, finding out of the 100 people, the 2 people that you can collaborate with. And this is the start of the campaign. This is who we were. We were a tiny group. Actually, it wasn't the start. It was me, Councillor Emira Cole, and someone called Nicholas Strange. And then about 4 months later, it got to this group. And it kept growing and growing. But it didn't get much bigger than this group as a core group. And that went on for 11 months. And I would say the collaborators are on the next page, please. This is who the collaborators were. It was the Integrate Care Board, a couple of them. It was Emira Cole, Sovereign Housing, who let us use their building for social, for social goodness and social use. We bought the equipment of Bupa. We had a deal. Sovereign Housing let us have the building for 1 year for free. So we set up all the assets for us. We were quite blessed as well. But it took particularly people like me to know that you could do that. You can ask for it. What's the least they can say? No? And then when they say no, you just interrogate until you get a yes. So you win in the end, right? So just keep on going. So yeah, thank you for listening to me. I just wanted to end it on this definition of an ally. What's a good ally? And it's about knowing how how you could be an ally, knowing the definition of it, and how you could learn from just the definition of it to taking action to help others for social change and to be part of bigger change. And it's always worth it. It's always worth it, because if not, what's the alternative? So yeah, guys, disrupt away. Thank you.
Hi everyone, it's a delight to be here. My name is Asim Inam. I'm really here to listen and learn and find common ground. So I wear 3 hats. I know all of you wear multiple hats, but there's a reason I'm mentioning what my hats are for. Primarily, I'm here to represent the Stokes-Croft Land Trust, which is a relatively young organization compared to some of the really accomplished people here. But I also teach at Cardiff University, and I mentioned that. I'll tell you why that's important. And I'm also director of experimental practice called Lab for Urban Transformation. If you want to follow us, there's our Twitter handles. So True Lab and Stokes-Croft. So what is our mission? So this is, it's our mission at the Stokes-Croft Land Trust is to acquire and steward buildings and property. And the key word is land in all this, in Stokes-Croft, with and on behalf of the local community for the long term. We are a community benefit society which has been created as a grassroots institution, governed and run democratically by its members to acquire and steward buildings and property in Stokes-Croft on behalf of the local community for the long term. So this is probably the key sentence here at the end. Our goal is to take land out of the speculative capital investment market, which, as all of you know, is not easy, but we are working very hard at it, and then into secure community ownership, thereby enabling long-term, affordable, and sustainable local development, putting the control of local areas back into the hands of local people. Next, please. So I'm going to talk more about the process, because it's an ongoing process, what we are doing, what our goals are, what our strategies are. That's why I subtitled the presentation, Strategic Alliances and Creative Strategies, what we are working on. So who are the most important people for our small organization? Our 400 plus members, very devoted community members, and the largest Stokes-Croft community. I want to talk about the word community a little bit. That, as you know, the whole notion of community is changing. It used to be people living next to each other, but we can be connected across the city, across the world. And so, for example, we have a lot of members of the Stokes-Croft Community Land Trust who don't necessarily live there, but believe in it and want to support through money, through volunteer work, through being on the board, etc. So just an example of how we do engagement. Our most recent AGM was quite interactive. We had really fantastic breakout sessions, kind of brainstorming about what's going on, what we can do. And then there was an exhibition of my students, which I'll talk about a little more briefly later, of creative brainstorming about potential projects. What can happen here? Next, please. We have a board of trustees, like all of you do. It's an 11-member all-volunteer board. One of the issues we have, as I'm sure maybe several of you have, we don't have part of full-time staff yet. That's one of our goals, to be able to fund a position like that so they can support us in our work. But it's a great, great board. I really love being with them. It's a very dynamic group. Next, please. Oh, by the way, if you didn't notice, can you go back 1 second? I don't know if you, maybe it's a little faded. The person on the left, that's Catherine. She used to be on our board, then we lost her, so we are trying to clone her back with new technology. Okay, so the first achievement was just a few months ago. I've been there for about a year and a half, but there have been others who've been there for longer. They worked very hard, but together we achieved this. We bought our first property, which, for those of you know, is the People's Republic of Stokes-Croft building on Jamaica Street in Stokes-Croft. It's the PRC headquarters. It was a long process, as you can imagine, with fighting against market forces of property negotiation and fundraising, but this is the building. So officially, SCLT, Stokes-Croft Land Trust, is the landlord, and PRSC, People's Republic of Stokes-Croft, is tenant. But in reality, and this is my phrasing, we are sister organizations. So it's not this power relationship. So we work together. We have a couple of common board members. because we share the same spirit of community-oriented grassroots activism and also anti-gentrification goals. So one example of what, of course, PRSC has been doing it for a while, and now we are going to support and encourage them, is supporting artists, which I know is a big issue in Bristol. So they have studios, they have workshops, they have this famous China manufacturing place. If you haven't seen it, I encourage you to go to the China shop on Jamaica Street. It's really cool stuff. We buy gifts from there all the time for our friends and family. Next, please. So now I'm going to get into the strategic alliances and creative strategy, and this is where Cardiff University comes in, and this is something I initiated. The board supported me, which is basically having this partnership with Cardiff University through me in two ways. First of all, doing research. I think that's really important, as you all know, understanding what the situation really is. What exactly is the problem? Kind of really digging deeper and figuring out, analyzing in a very serious way what's going on. So analyzing existing conditions, but then taking it forward into design, and in a very creative way, investigating what's possible, and kind of brainstorming about that. So my students made this model of Stokescroft and gifted it to the trust. So this is now, so there's a model of the entire neighborhood the trust can use for community engagement, etc., and it was there at our AGM. Next, please. So one of the reasons I got involved is I don't believe in this false dichotomy, which is quite common, of academia on one side, practice on the other side, kind of the theory and practice. And it's not only integrated, the best work, but it's research as practice. How do you do serious research as a form of practice, as a form of activism, as a form of action? So just as an example, these are two things that my students read. One is Who Owns England? It's a fantastic book, highly recommend it. It's just a few years ago by this investigative journalist, Guy Shrubsole, about how land really works, not just in Bristol, but in England. Who owns it? How land markets work? Why is it the way that it is? And then secondly, on the right, we looked at, very quickly, if you can go back one. Yeah, thanks. More research about Bristol and Stokescroft. This is specifically about Stokescroft, understanding the history of Stokescroft, and again, getting a deeper understanding of the complexity of what's actually going on. So this is several people at University of West of England in Bristol who did some great work on this wonderful legacy, continuing tradition of cultural activism in Stokescroft that some of the previous speakers touched on. Next, please. So what is the research we are doing on Stokescroft? On the left is a site map. In consultation with the board, we looked at potential sites for purchase and development. And then the students researched for each site, who are the property owners, what's the land value, what are the planning permissions, the things that the trust, because it doesn't have a staff, may not have a capacity to do, but it's very useful for them to strategize which properties, etc. Next, please. And out of that, I'm just showing very quickly some really creative brainstorming. Here, the mandate for the students was to do public-facing and community-benefiting projects on some of these sites. So you see a Center for Women Refugees, School of Food Activism, a hub for community transformation, and public toilets designed by artists. Next, please. And this idea of strategic alliances and creative strategies extend, and this is something I've practiced, I know many of us have practiced, beyond, of course, within Bristol, which is what's wonderful about this event and the previous events, but also learning from other places in the UK. So with the students, we went to Liverpool, we visited Granby 4 Streets Community Land Trust and Home Bay Community Land Trust. So there's a lot of, it's not just learning, but knowledge exchange, kind of creating these alliances, coming together all over the UK. Next, please. And then beyond, and this here I'm talking from personal experience because I've lived and worked in different parts of the world. We have been living in an interconnected global world for a long time, and we can learn from others. So not to say, I think, was it Emma who said something wonderful, don't believe you are unique, but also don't believe we are all the same. So we have to look at differences and similarities and then find the common ground. And so I got this grant from the Arts and Humanities Research Council to look at this whole phenomenon of co-designing publics, which maybe I can explain more in the discussion. And we looked at 6 different cities around the world and the incredible work, people actually doing more with less resources. So as you know, in some of these parts of the world, there's kind of political oppression, there's fewer resources, more constraints, but some examples of cities. So these were kind of activists, practitioners that we invited, and we learned from each other. So from Jakarta, Bengaluru in India, Sao Paulo, Phnom Penh in Cambodia, Cape Town, South Africa, and Cali in Colombia. And so it was a partnership between academics and activist practitioners, so learning from each other. Again, going beyond this, I think, really outdated dichotomy of academia versus practice. And we published a book, and the idea was to generate knowledge together. So not just exchanging ideas, but what are the commonalities we can find while acknowledging our differences? That's it. Thank you. Please visit our website.
Hi everyone. Yeah, so I run Easton Community Centre and Felix Road Adventure Playground, so 2 community spaces in Easton. And so tonight I was just going to talk a little bit about us and then a little bit more about the work Emma touched on earlier around our community building manifesto. So we run these buildings on behalf of Bristol City Council, on behalf of all of us as a community, and we have lots of things that happen from those spaces, so lots of projects. We do a community magazine. We are also the landlord to 2 nurseries that are run by a social enterprise. We're also the home of Hurrier, which is a fantastic social enterprise providing food and employment for women. With a home to BCFM radio, and we also have 4 shops which we rent out in Barton Hill. So that's a lot of community space that we are, currently the stewards of. And we really believe in the value of community space as like the bedrock of all of us, really, of our community, our connections with each other, our well-being. And there's a couple of things. So all of those organisations have been around in various times. So Easton Community Centre was built in 1989 by the community of Easton, and Felix Road was built by the residents in 1972. And through those journey, through the 50 years, they've had a kind of up and down, and because during that time they were taken into council ownership. And then when the council also then lost its funding, it went back into community ownership. So it shows that over time, things change quite a lot. And so looking at how do we protect those spaces into the future is kind of where we are now. But before I talk a bit more about those things, let's see if we can show a little bit of just this little flavour of why community spaces are so important.
It's just a place where I know I can always come, so I can just hang out here all day. I can buy delicious food if I want to, but I could also just come and not spend any money. I come here with my son on the same day every week, and I always see the same people. It's just an essential bit of community that I would be just distraught without, to be honest.
I've written familiarity and freedom because I know that when I bring my kids here, they know their way around and they're safe and we can be surrounded by nature and free to play.
We live in the city centre, so having a space where we can connect with nature is really important for us.
So I've written it's a fun and welcoming space for children to be free and to play. So that's why I always come here and I love it.
So I've written beautiful plants, local veg, or local food and community spirit, and it brings people together in the most beautiful way. So that's what I love about the farm.
So what I love about coming to the community centre is the diverse range of people and activities that you find here. So for example, today I'm here with my friend and her baby, hanging out, and I'm looking forward to coming when my own baby is born. So it's just, there's so many ways that you can use this space.
Space to come with my son and feel welcome with all of our mess.
A very lovely place. I would call it a home from home for me personally. Thank you.
One of the things, though, that we did is we went through a merger. So those three, so the shops and the community centre and the playground were all separate organisations, all struggling a little bit with capacity, with resources, but all trying to move into the same direction of having great community spaces in Eastham. And so we started working together, and then quickly we decided, well, why don't we just merge and create one organisation? And that's what we did to form Eastside Community Trust. And actually, it's something that not very many organisations do. I know we know a couple of people have talked about when doing things, you're not always doing something that has never been done before, but people do quite like to set up new projects, new organisations, but not very many people merge them into one. So actually it really strengthened us coming together, and it meant that we had more capacity to actually care for these spaces into the future. So yeah, it was kind of a really difficult piece of work to do, but it's made us a lot stronger. So kind of thinking about how you kind of merge people together to actually create something that's a bit more sustainable. And running the community spaces is really hard work. Actually, I think one of the things I didn't really kind of realise is exactly how much work running a building is and how much of our time that takes. Not just kind of the money to do it, but the repairs, the maintenance. Something is always going wrong, major and minor. It's an open door to the public, so both of those buildings are open to the public 6 days a week. Like anyone can walk through that door, and they usually do. And so like dealing with that every day, day to day, and kind of the unpredictableness of that, and how much kind of that takes emotionally and physically and resource-wise for the team, and kind of inclusion and accessibility, and how to make those spaces feel like a welcoming environment for anybody that walks through that door is a really tough job, because actually they're old buildings. Different groups have different needs in the spaces, and how you can kind of make that space work for as many of those people as possible. So kind of all of those things were really hard, and it felt like actually it was a lot of joy, but a lot of exhaustion as well. And so thinking about how we reached out into the network of other people that were running community spaces to support one another. And we were also finding that Bristol City Council and our kind of relationship with them was becoming more difficult. So for people who already run community spaces and for people who want to, that relationship was quite challenging. And it was feeling like a lot of the practices and policies were kind of quite unhelpful rather than helpful, helping more people to run spaces. So I kind of got in touch with some of my colleagues and peers like Emma, and we kind of floated the idea of putting together our manifesto of what had we learned running community spaces in the last, dare I say, 10 to 15 years, and what could we do, what do we think could be done to kind of make that process easier and better, and that we're part of the solution together. So that's where we came with this, Roots of Resilience, our manifesto. And I suppose and it felt like this is a time for change. There's political change in the council in this city, and there's lots of organising like this going on with like citizens wanting things to be different. But it's also about us reaching out to the council to say, like, we're in this together. It's not an adversarial kind of, you're the bad guys and we're the good guys here. It's, okay, we've all got a role to play in safeguarding these buildings. You look at the history of Eastham Community Centre and Felix Road in the past, which were always run by the community. The council did step in to save them when they were both struggling, but going bankrupt. They both had money defrauded from them. So the council stepped in at that point. Now we've kind of stepped back in again when the council's money is kind of running out. So we're in this together for the long term. And, that's where the council does have that role to play in kind of that steward as well as us. But that kind of process of collaboration needs to be better. And so what we've done is we've kind of used our learning and experience of running the spaces to kind of make a set of recommendations to the council of how that could be better and how we could work together on kind of solving the problems we all face, but also in terms of keeping those buildings today and into tomorrow in the next 100 years. So I think that's probably all I wanted to say. So there's lots of ways you can support that by kind of showing support for your community spaces wherever you live and the ones that you use. And yeah, that's probably all I wanted to say.
Hello everyone. Thanks for having me. My name's Ben Stevenson and I'm the organiser of the Bristol Urban Forum. I think it's a kind of mere minnow next to some of the projects that we've heard about tonight, but I just wanted to talk through a little bit about what we've done over the last year. It is a kind of one-year experiment, slightly make it up as we go along. We're calling it 10 Conversations About Bristol, and the idea is that the agenda is set by the kind of citizens of Bristol. So I know I've seen some of you at some of our events, so it's great to be here today. When I first heard about Sparks, this is kind of the start of the story because we're based here as well. So when I first heard about Sparks, I really wanted to come and see it because my day job is in high streets and town centres, and I do a lot of work kind of advising places on how to kind of make place essentially, particularly in high streets and town centres. And so when I heard about Sparks and the kind of regeneration of Sparks as a community space, I had to come and see it, and I met Catherine and Jenny and others, and they were kind enough to give us a space here for the year. So I guess huge thanks to Catherine and to Sparks, the whole team, but also what a space. I mean, it's so brilliant. I go to lots of places around the country to see spaces, and there's nothing like this. It's so quintessentially Bristol. And it's so wonderful to see it happening. And every time you kind of walk through the ground floor, you know, there's more and more stuff happening, and it's really exciting, and it's a kind of resurgence of something really important, I think, for our high streets. So thanks to Sparks. Also thanks to Sparks, obviously, for putting this on tonight, because it's brilliant to see so many of you here and to hear about these projects. Next slide, please. So it's a one-year project based at Sparks. The idea is basically just we're here to listen. We spent a whole year listening. I'll go through some of the events in a second. But the idea is that it's a kind of citizen-led approach to city transformation. So thinking very specifically about what the issues are in Bristol, and getting people to talk about those and kind of listening. And then at the end, it's manifesto fever by the looks of it. But we were also talking about producing a manifesto. I hope we have time before the general election. Well, actually, I prefer an earlier general election, so that's fine. Why does Bristol need the Urban Forum? Well, I think, you know, we've heard tonight there's all sorts of projects going on which are really about engaging citizens. But for me, specifically, I wanted something where we could get people together to debate particularly the future of the city, particularly in a neutral setting like this. We were really interested in Sparks because what we wanted was the kind of passerby, the shopper, the people that don't ordinarily get involved in sort of consultations or engagement. And I think quite a lot of what I do when I go to see places, you know, I'm so sorry if there's local authority people here, I'm not bashing you, but when you go to a consultation that's local authority run, it's very like, please comment on like section 8 of our local plan, you know, and it's like it's boring and dry, and what we're trying to do here is kind of get much more creative about what people are saying about the future of cities, what the issues are. So we're calling it an experiment in citizen-led placemaking for social cohesion, high-minded or what? The next slide, please. So what we did. The first thing we did was like big agenda setting events in here, over there, it's now blocked off behind there, where we had lots of people come and we had lots of engagement to begin with, where we were really asking people to set their agenda. So just tell us what you think the big problems are. And in the next slide, they came up with 10 themes. What we're asking people to do, you know, what's the specific problem? What's your experience of this? So that's really, really key for us, is what is the experience here? Well, that's what we're here to collect. Experience is incredibly important and so often overlooked. How can we look at this differently? Very particularly thinking about, so this is your experience, but try to put yourself in the shoes of somebody that might have a different experience or might look at it differently. And then where could this take us? So thinking a little bit about how we problem solve this. They're the themes, and obviously they're great. But once we kind of came up with these themes and we were kind of looking at it, the conversations that we were having with people were much more around how do these are all different systems basically in Bristol, and they intersect in all sorts of really, really interesting ways. And so what we didn't want to do is have an event on transport, an event on decision making. So on the next slide, you'll see we began to kind of look at the overarching filters that we could apply to these systems, these multiple systems, thinking a bit systemically about what's going on in Bristol. So Locked Out Bristol was the first one. And the reason why we did that one was because when we were talking to people about their experience, if we could go back a slide, sorry, that's really unfair. When you look at these systems, they all involve a kind of measure of exclusion in all sorts of different ways. So, you know, when people are talking about their experience of transport and like, I can't get into town because the buses are terrible, or, you know, I can't get access to good food, or issues around equality, issues around housing, there's so much stuff around exclusion there that what we wanted to focus on, and then go back to the next slide, is like, how people are locked out and what the cost of the city is, as well as what the cost of the individual was. So spent a lot of time collecting information around that. And then the next slide, this is another event that we had, Nocturnal Bristol. That's Carly Heath, who's the Bristol's night czar, being filmed by our brilliant people at Screenology. So we've got like people that are filming this for us, young people that are kind of picking up experience with it. It's really interesting. And this was really about, you know, again, looking at those themes, but thinking about how the nighttime works in the city and you know, what the kind of particular issues are around equity and fairness, and how people are treated and who's excluded from the nighttime and all of that sort of stuff. So thinking social, economic, environmental. And the next slide, this is Cradle to Grave. We've got represented both ends of the spectrum, but thinking about life stage and how Bristol works for people at different life stages, thinking about the kind of the way that the kind of city operates. You know, there's this kind of assumption that if you're older that you probably have to move out of the city, there's not much for you. But actually, how can we redesign the city in a way that provides for everyone? Because a kind of multifunctional city and a kind of multi-age city is a resilient city. Really important for us. And then we've got this kit camp thing. We've got one of our people's like building stuff. It's around the corner actually. Kind of like building things and using different methods to get experience out of people. And the next slide, this is the last one we did, which is around the cost of inequality. So thinking back to the reasons why people, you know, Bristol's obviously one of the most unequal cities in the UK, and asking people, this on the left is inequality, snakes and ladders. We were kind of playing with the idea about how people are kind of disadvantaged in all sorts of ways that reinforce each other all the time, and kind of collecting that experience through people, and thinking not only again about what the cost to those individuals are, but what the cost of the city is, and then coming up with a whole bunch of recommendations that will go in the manifesto. So they're the ones that we've done. We've got a couple more coming up. The next one is around the Bristol brand, because I'm really interested in it, in hearing what people think the messages are kind of outwards to Bristol, what people think that Bristol stands for, what are its values. So we're going to be doing that on the 23rd of March. And then the final one, this is kind of an important one because it's almost like the sort of crux of what we've been doing, is the way that our events have gone, they feel very like a kind of citizens' assembly sort of structure, but they're not, because we don't use sortition, you know, we're not doing all sorts of things. But one of the things that will come out of this, because of what people have been saying, is citizen participation is absolutely central. And we've talked to loads of people tonight and to others throughout the process around what citizen participation means. And we've been talking to the kind of political decision makers in the city and saying, you know, its time has come. We really feel as though a citizens' assembly is absolutely necessary for the city in a kind of permanent basis. So thinking about how that can be delivered. And one of the things we did for the sortition thing was got 100 letters and posted them through random letterboxes, which takes much longer than you'd imagine. I thought it would be like an afternoon, but it was about 2 weeks. I don't know if I've got another slide. Yeah. So once we've got through all of the events, we're going to be writing the place manifesto, like everyone else. Really kind of working with Involve, which is a national organisation around how we kind of bring in citizen participation in a really kind of meaningful way, and just because of what we've learnt tonight and about, you know, all of the people that we've met through the process, it's really great that this is happening. we didn't think we were the only ones, but it's so great to meet you, and obviously happy to team up in whatever way. And I think that's kind of part of the conversation tonight is, where we go from here. Our experiment is ending. We are very happy to wrap it up. It's been exhausting, but also really, really happy to kind of team up with whoever. So that's our message for tonight. Thank you.
I'm not actually from... I had to stand. You're not from the future. Yeah, I'm not from the future, but I'm also not from Bristol 2040, really. I am just here as myself, so I feel a little bit of an imposter. I don't have a grand manifesto or plan or organisation. Just here kind of advocating a attitude, really. So Art Space Life Space was very kind to give me a residency over the last half year or so on using creativity towards climate action on climate change. Now, climate change is a very difficult thing to talk about for a great many reasons, but perhaps one of the first things to start with is the fact that people always disagree on what you actually call it. Do you call it climate change? Do you call it global warming? Do you call it climate chaos? I think one of my favourite terms for it is instead of climate change, everything change, because essentially our whole way of life, our whole societies, our cities, everything is going to have to change, and that means reimagining everything. So it was essentially seeing it as a space to explore different tools about how we can approach the future and the city we want to live in with the creativity needed. And I should also do visual descriptions in case anyone needs them. This is Park Street, which through my very dodgy photoshopping has been turned into a very green space with wildflower meadows in the road, a bison munching on the flowers, a tree sticking out of the top of Will's Memorial. But yeah, could we go on to the next slide, please? So I was kind of very inspired by Disney's modes of creativity. I don't know if anybody has heard about that, but basically he has this idea that there are 3 modes to kind of projects and creative thinking, where you start with the dreamer on the left here. So that's a girl with kind of chalk illustrations showing her imagining herself as an astronaut. And in the middle, we've got the realist, so someone drawing concrete plans of what looks like a garden. And then finally, you have the critic who kind of looks back and kind of thinks through how you could have done it all better. Now, the thing about the modes is that this idea says that often people get these modes very muddled up. So before we've even given ourselves space to dream, we start bringing in practicalities and go, do we have the budget? Does the policy going to allow this? Which I think is a real shame, because it kind of shuts off kind of what ourselves thinking, what future might we even want to live in before we've even begun that process. So I think it's really vital that we give ourselves spaces to dream when we think about climate action, because otherwise we're going to easily replicate new problems and not even kind of think through the place we want to be heading to. So next slide, please. So we, for this event, thinking about Bristol as a nature utopia, we were starting with this idea of backcasting, which is where you begin with the future where you want to be, and then you work backwards. So I'll just read the definition. So a method in which the future desired conditions are envisioned and steps are then defined to attain those conditions, rather than taking steps that are merely continuation of present methods extrapolated into the future. So I was working with 2 lovely collaborators, James Ward and Alice Sasson-Brown, and we created this idea of a speculative salon. So when we're thinking about what creative methods can we use to imagine the future, we're thinking about all the kind of Bloomsbury set salons and that kind of thing. But then we kind of looked at how do you run a salon, and it was actually, we thought it was a little bit boring. So we thought, actually, instead of having a presenter talking about their amazing work, maybe we could have a presentation from the future. So someone talking about the future in which amazing things have happened. And then we thought, what about instead of just having a speaker from the future, let's put everyone in the future. So that's what we did. So we can have the next slide, please. So people came along and they were invited to pick up a badge off the table, which was basically identified them as part of one of the activist groups that were essential in making this nature utopia of 2040. And then we started with the total dream space. So as we were talking about the Disney creative modes, we were thinking about what do we want the world to look like? What do we want it to feel like? What is that nature in our city going to be? Without bringing in any kind of limitation at all, like the sky was the limit. And then once people have had that space to imagine what they want it to look like, we started working backwards. So we kind of had a timeline of what needed to happen to get to that point, and people were building in those step-by-step backwards through until now. And to kind of support people in this process, we were using a technique that we'd stolen from a brilliant process called Thing from the Future, which is where you have two envelopes where you pour out one card, which gives you an emotion, and one card which gives you an object, and then you have to kind of imagine your story of what happened using those two things. So you might bring out like potato and happy, and then people go, oh, well, that was a really important part of building our climate utopia because we needed nutritious food, and so we grew lots of potatoes and people were really behind that. But there were all sorts of strange things that come up. So basically forcing people to look at the future in an imaginative way. And then we finally ended with people building a monument to that future. If you go to the next slide, I think we've got one of them. Yeah, so here we've got some monuments on the left. We've got a cardboard sign saying living and growing together. In the middle, we've got a boy standing in the middle of some cardboard tubes which have been turned into trees with bits of leaves sticking out, and then some blue fabric joining them as rivers. And on the right, we've got some paper boats in the middle of a kind of wild mess of willow, which was supposed to stand for the harbour side being turned into a wetland, and working with the people living there on boats to do so. So lots of different ideas came up along those kind of lines of unearthing the rivers under Bristol, giving each child a tree to grow with when they're born, so we have that connection to the natural world seeded right from the beginning, and lots about kind of nature connecting into food and community. I mean, I think one of the big things that was kind of coming out with it was this kind of the importance of seeing climate and nature action through the lens of community, stopping thinking about sacrificing things and all the difficulties that were going to be faced through things like driving less, and actually just focusing instead on what we gain. Next slide. Yeah, so this is just another picture of the monuments with the cardboard tubes. Sorry, I always struggle to juggle two things. So I think one of the things that we've learned, and we've kind of this idea that we tested here in Sparks, we've gone on to test with other places, used with one of the BRICS Community Climate Action Plan to think about actual concrete changes that people might be making. It is a struggle to get people in this kind of mode of thinking. When you start, you're always fighting people, saying, no, stop talking about funding, or try and have some fun. But when you kind of push people out of that comfort zone, kind of nudge people into actually experiencing some joy, they really get into it. They say that it helps ideas come quicker and more easily. People say that they found it kind of hopeful and joyful and exciting, which is, words you really don't hear connected with climate change work. So I think that's really important for both building that dream space towards what we can do, but also building personal resilience. So I think the situation around climate and nature change is so dire, both kind of locally and nationally, that if we only think and work incrementally, then I think the fight is already lost. We essentially have to do the impossible, but I think if we give ourselves the spaces to dream, then the impossible can be very possible. Thank you.
I'm Professor of City Futures at the University of the West of England, and I've been working on issues around urban practices for almost 2 decades. And specifically, I'm going to speak about a programme that when I came to work at UWE in 2016, I set up called Repair Acts. And I'll just let that all settle in for a second. So Repair Acts aims to foster restorative futures by looking at what we used to do in the past to what we're doing now to how we might imagine the future. So that knitting and that weaving of the past, the present and the future is really kind of critical to the work of RepairAx. And you may not be able to read that particular reference there, but Donna Haraway is a cybernetic thinker and philosopher, and let's say speculative fabulations is one of the things that she sort of comes up with. But she speaks to how it matters what stories tell stories. And I think that across the presentations this evening, we have sort of seen the evidencing of that through practices from the ground up, where we're trying to shift those stories of how we tell and how we run and how we organize the living arrangements, basically, of life, which is actually what we're all kind of working at the coalface around. So RepairAx tries to do this by a very specific thing, and that is to look at this question about repairability, and particularly that in relation to our material cultures. And I guess one of the things that is probably worth referencing is that within the UK and some European countries, there's about 28 kilos of e-waste per year that we're sort of producing per person. So if you imagine me standing here with 28 kilos of sugar bags hanging off me, in comparison to some countries in Africa, they produce 3 kilos per person, all right? 28 to 3. I don't think we have to really say much more than that in a sense. And where is that ending up, of course? It's ending up in various dumps across the world that are all sometimes hidden, sometimes visible. There's a sort of social economic labor that then is going with that. And we don't have any power at the moment in terms of the consumption of our power as consumers. If I pay £1,000 for a laptop or a couple of £100 for a new phone, I don't yet declare where that might be going. I don't say, hey, Mr. Apple or Mrs. Apple, or they, them, he, she, her, it, Apple. I want some of that proportion of those profits that you're making to go to somebody who's picking that mineral out of the ground, or who is actually cleaning up that crap at the end of the day. So how do we create then these just and equitable material relations? So one of the things that we've been doing is we've been having conversations around that. And that sometimes happens in all of the ways that you have also been developing conversations through crowdsourcing ideas, through workshopping, through speaking with people, through running workshops. Next slide, please. And one of the things that we did in 2019 through support with the British Council and with our collaborators in India called Toxic Links and in Brazil called Gambiologia, because we feel it's really important in thinking about how we're going to shift some of these dynamics that we're actually working in to work with those that are in the global south as well. And that sitting behind that idea is a notion of what is kind of called, I guess, a pluriverse design perspective in a way, that multiple different kind of perspectives on something, and the difference, the difference of those lived experiences and ways of thinking about how to live life, right? Difference has to be held, not negated, not normalized, not homogenized, but actually celebrated and held, right? And that's this notion of the kind of the pluralism in a sense. And so when I speak about thinking through new research paradigms, it's also from that lens. What does it mean to decenter, even the sort of solo idea of the PI we speak about in academic research, the principal investigator, or the solo artist, or the solo designer in a sense, or architect. We have to shift some of those kind of paradigms in a sense. And that decentering that is required then will help us to come through some of those ideas of what it means to have a more than human perspective that honors the nature relationships that we were also highlighting in the last talk. So what did we do then to create this type of approach with the Bristol Repair Declaration? We essentially crowdsourced statements of what people would do to change ways that we can repair things in the city. And ideas that were very concrete that came up were, for example, vouchers on goods that are repaired, providing business rates that are more equitable for those that are running repair businesses, creating spaces and hubs through which people can actually learn skills around repair, thinking through what we're now discussing as repair pathways in a sense, and how do you design those then across the city with other stakeholders and communities in unison, so that we can start to, in a sense, look at those steps towards sort of change, and how can that change then also link to those broader social, geopolitical, labour conditions that others are engaged in that are providing us with the types of materials that we're using on a daily basis. So that's sort of like the broad goal of Repair Hacks. So this repair declaration is now going forward, next slide please, to a workshop that I'll speak to you about as I kind of close this particular session. But another thing that we were doing was looking at how we can map local repair economies. As I mentioned, Repair Acts looks to how we knit the past, the present and the future, because the future is now, really, it's now, yeah? This is where we're at. Be present, be in the moment, that's the now in a sense. So when we were looking at this map is really interesting because just did it around the sort of Bedminster sort of kind of a my square mile was the kind of the radius of the scope of the work. And we triangulated this data from fire insurance maps, trade directories, etc. And you can sort of see the pattern of the war here in a way, like you see Totterdown back in the 30s and 58. We took these 20-year time slices, 38, 58, 78, 98 and 2018 in this particular case. And what you sort of see is that there was an awful lot of domestic repair economy going on, yeah, in people's homes and backyards, because it's kind of the way the dots are distributed here. But then post-World War II, we sort of see it shifting here to where these yellow dots are now around the industrial estates that were sort of in Asda, that are close to Asda and the Windmill Hill City Farm. What this does is kind of allow us to sort of map something that's quite important, and that's the next slide, please, is these changes in local repair economies over time also share with us the changes in the diversity and the accessibility of local repair economies. So when we go back to 1938, we can see all of these different types of things that were repaired locally. Essentially, your shoes, your bikes, the lime wash in your house, etc., etc. You also see that there wasn't that much consumer goods that we sort of have, like a single radio or TV, etc. And this over time starts to shift. One thing I just want to put forward here, just as you know, you may not have all time to read these bar charts, but that sort of purple colour at the top, that's just throwaway culture in relation to clothes and textiles alone. So that's how much you could get repaired in 38. That's how much you could get repaired in 58 in terms of businesses that were registered to fix your clothes, and that's 2018. Yeah, and I live in this neighbourhood, and it's probably pretty much the dry cleaners in Asda. So that's what has been happening to us. And when you sort of look at this chart again, you'll see that the monopolization, next slide please, of types of electronic repair services, which is what we were actually focusing on. You see again here changes, you know, it's not a surprise perhaps that radio and TV was, you know, more present in 38, completely disappears from the chart in 28 because we don't have those things anymore. But mobile phones then start to dominate, yeah? So these types then, this monopolization of certain types of repair practices, which again, of course, map to what we are actually buying and consuming, right? But the point of it is the diversity, yeah? The difference, the idea of the pluriverse, the differences in things, yeah, is disappeared. Next slide, please. So in 2021, some of you might know this, but Europe led it, actually America led it in a sense, in terms of the right to repair movement. Right to repair laws came in. And what that allows us to do, it's fixed on particular goods and services, that there's now a demand, and this was the right to repair movement, the global right to repair movement across the world fought for this, joined together with farmers, with activists, with hackers, with politicians that were into it, etc., to change the laws and regulations so that it is illegal not to provide spare parts. It's illegal not to provide a manual with the thing that you actually sell. Next slide, please. However, some of these things are still not going to kind of get fixed overnight. And there's issues around warranties, there's issues around the community repair movement, that if you get it fixed in a community repair movement, you're not able to maybe, like, it dismisses the warranty, etc. I can go on about it for ages. But if you want to hear more about this and some of these issues, on Tuesday evening in the Watershed, we'll be screening two short video works and a 40-minute documentary on repair practices. It focuses on professional repairers that are actually in Ireland, but the story is one that actually resonates with those that we've been collecting over the last 7 years in the project across Bristol, across India, Brazil, and other countries that we're working in. And it will really sort of, I guess, highlight some of these conditions of material relationships and labour that we're actually sort of trying to address in terms of actually the shifts. So I'm going to close on that, just in terms of inviting you to that, and the next slide as well. In terms of predating the screening, we'll be hosting a workshop that looks at a series of workshops to develop the Bristol Repair Coalition, because we love a coalition, we love a declaration, we love a manifesto, we love commoning. I think we're obviously sign of the times in Bristol in what we're into. But just to close on that, it's about strategic alignments, and I'm looking here at Mark Jacobs and Catherine, and Jenny Ford was passing through here a few minutes, Materials in Mind, but many, Bristol Waste, for example, and colleagues across the University of the West of England and Bristol University as well. But I just want to give a shout out to Laura Fogg-Rogers, my colleague at UWE, who's been looking at repair cafes, Laura Morgan, who looks at kinder materials from a digital perspective, Lisa Amal, who looks at repairability from an actual heritage perspective, and also Fiona Dowling, who's setting up the materials library. So we're all kind of working together as a group of feminist, I would say, scholars, practitioners, designers, and educators within UWE to look at how we can actually promote this type of work in the city and be specific around particular targets that we want to hit over the next kind of coming years in terms of changing that relationship, so that we can actually go to that diversity and accessibility of repair economies locally within Bristol. And very happy also just to end on the same note of saying, come up, join us, have a chat. If you want to come to the workshop on Tuesday, there's still some spaces. We'll be releasing some other dates, and we'd love to connect with the Bristol Forum, because much of this work stems from Urban Hosts as well, which is this conversational format around city living that I've also been running for the last 10 years. So yeah, use us academics when we're here and around, and open for it, as you were also saying, Assam. So thank you.